Welcome everybody. Patrick today is going to tell us about his new book. So take the mic, Patrick.
Hey Greg, how you doing? Assalamu alaikum.
Alhamdulillah wa alaikum assalam wa barakatuh.
Cool. Yeah, good to talk with you. Working on a project. Title is "A Light That Would Blind the World," which is comes from a saying of a of a scholar. I believe Imam Ashadhili said, that if the heart of a of a disobedient believer were opened, its light would blind the world. So like the sinner, basically. And it's a project. It's about about European Muslim converts in the 1600s, which I kind of got inspired by this because I didn't know that was really a thing. I just didn't really think of it, that there were people from the countries we think of as Europe, Northern Europe, all of Europe, from Russia to Spain to Scandinavia, British Isles, who were converting to Islam in the 1600s, 1500s, 400 or 500 years ago. It wasn't just a thing. It was very significant. There were hundreds of thousands or even millions of these individuals at any given time, and that they were very influential in Mediterranean Africa. They couldn't. Basically that we have this concept now that there's a hard line between Europe and Islam, and that's just not really true. That it's always been much more fluid than is really than the sort of common cognitive frame would have you think. And that I particularly got inspired by the story of this one convert. Renegade was the historical name for it. It feels like a little bit of it might be sort of a pejorative that's turned into a badge of honor. How words sometimes do that it's an insult, and then the party that's being insulted takes it and kind of uses it as their rallying cry, sort of.
Yeah.
Because renegade has kind of become a favorable word now. It's a little romantic. You look up to at least the right. You can be a righteous renegade.
Yeah.
So I think at the time it was it was applied by Europeans to people who had converted from Christianity to Islam, and of course they also, you couldn't, with few limited exceptions, you couldn't really live openly as a Muslim in Europe in that era. So almost always that also meant moving to Africa, moving to Mediterranean Africa, what is now Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, or the Eastern Ottoman Europe. But this particularly focuses on a renegade, a particular convert who was influential in Morocco, and who was a Corsair, which was basically sort of a state. It was a state-run piracy, at that time, which all states did. It was part of sort of the all the European states and all the Muslim states kind of had this organized commercial aspect to war. Yeah, privateering is the technical term. Pirates would be like freelance thieves. Privateers act on behalf of a government, and governments negotiate on their behalf. And that it's like one of the tools on the spectrum of like diplomacy and war. It seems like the privateers, they were pretty skilled at, they didn't want to get in fights, and people, if you're just at your job, you don't want to get killed over your job. If you're a sailor and somebody attacks your ship, you just say, okay, take the goods, So that it seems like they generally were pretty humane. But yeah, it's pretty cool, trying to figure out what this world was like, because it's not the way it's stereotyped at all.
It's not your standard history class, in grade school, huh?
Well, yeah, I mean, the renegades have really been overlooked, deliberately or by ignorance, or who knows, one way or another, they're not really prominent. But it seems like basically the class of people who, the American dream for a European who's in poverty and really struggling and doesn't really have any options. A lot of time, there's a whole, many waves of people from different areas of Europe have come to this continent. And it sounds like in the era before colonization of the Americas, or in the early part of colonization of the Americas, when it was basically Spain and Portugal, in the 1500s, before Northern Europe had really gotten involved. In that era, it was, people use the phrase the Turkish dream, Turkish being sort of, more properly sort of Moorish or Muslim, like, that emigrating to Africa, and often, though not always, converting to Islam, was really a major opportunity. Like, if you wanted to seek your fortune, that you weren't gonna, if you were a serf in feudal Europe, like, you weren't gonna get anything. You couldn't buy and sell and, own a business or any of that type of stuff. It just wasn't gonna happen. But yeah, many people, again, estimates go into the millions of the number of people who emigrated from Europe and became Muslim, and yeah, often, many of them, once they're on the high seas, they, a lot of times you find them in Ireland, England. There's some interesting studies. Well, it's hard to see it, because it's hard to see what was really going on, because, for example, there have been a lot of studies of European literature at the time, like, plays and poems and stuff. And generally those are pretty, like, people know Shakespeare, Othello Shakespeare's Othello is a major, like, people know that one. And it's pretty stereotypical, like, he's this sort of hot-headed, like, like, he's not portrayed in a good light, and he's probably one of the kinder ones. Like, a lot of them are it's polemics, it's stereotypes. But there've been a few historians, especially over the past, few decades, who have looked at commercial records and, like, even sort of, official, council documents, like, of branches of government and of, records of jails and stuff, and have started to see that there's actually, like, for example, I'm using one source that looks at England, and there's quite a lot of, not a lot, but, some hundreds of Muslims who wind up in jails in European coastal towns, basically privateers who, like, something happened and they got taken prisoner. So if you've got a few hundred who are actually in jail, like, how many more are sailing around freely,
Yeah.
That, they feel like they can come up to England and Ireland, and often, one of the things that would happen is they would, the English were also very active going to the Mediterranean, and they had a fairly strong diplomatic relationship with the Muslims there. So the Muslims were sort of more ready, they would readily come to England, though they weren't always, sometimes they thought they had treaties to come into the ports and they would be taken prisoner. But anyway, it's hard to see it because again, the literature, the plays, the poetry is very stereotypical. But then the commercial records and the government records show that there's a lot of back and forth. It was very, There was very active engagement, and so it's not, it can't have all been, you know, obviously the engagement wasn't on the level of like stereotype, you know, not overtly, at least. You know, if you're going to buy and sell with somebody, you're not going to say that they're
this or
you know,
that
great.
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to do that to their face. Like, you know, that wouldn't make any sense. You know, and overall, the way I'm approaching this project is that you know, we have a different idea of, I think, within sort of the framework of Islam. Like, one of the things that we're taught is that, you know, rather than kind of this upward arc of progress where, you know, we're always getting better and we're better than our parents and we're better than the people who came in the past because we can do all these things now, we have a different, you know, we have more of a concept of decline, that the best of the generation was the prophetic generation and his companions, Allah Wasallam, may God be pleased with them, and that, you know, as time goes on, people become, you know, there's a decline, but there are still great people along the way. And so, you know, looking at it, it's sort of a process of like basically giving these people the benefit of the doubt, you know, that, okay, you know, so another issue is that the vast majority of the sources, not 100%, but the vast majority of the sources are from Europeans, just because, you know, maybe because we speak English, we have easier access to the archives. Colonialism destroyed a lot. Also, the renegades were by and large like the lower classes, so it wasn't literate people who were emigrating, but it was literate people who were writing about them in Europe. So, you know, so the vast majority of the literature is from people who didn't like the people they're writing about, you know. So you kind of have to see between the lines, like, where they'll give a lot of backhanded compliments, like they'll say a bunch of bad stuff, and then they'll say, oh, by the way, like, you could walk from here to there with a bunch of money and no one would rob you. And then they'll say a bunch more insults about, you know, about the people. But, oh, by the way, like, you know, they're not going to rob you on the road, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's kind of cool, you know? So to try to, you know, give them the benefit of the doubt, like, we know that, you know, so they were Muslims, like, maybe they weren't, you know, a lot of the histories, for example, will assume that these renegades, oh, they were just motivated by the money, you know, like they knew that if they went to Africa and converted to Islam, they could get rich, or at least they had a chance. So that they were all like that. They were just trying to get rich. But it's like, it's not, yeah, sure, some of them probably, you know, there are records of some who converted and then converted back, like when they had an offer from, you know, a European king, you know, and then, you know, maybe they went back and forth a few times.
Yeah. But that wasn't normative, right?
I mean, you got to think that probably some of them were sincere, you know, like that they had, you know, seen something in this religion, they believed in it, you know, and they tried to follow it. You know, for example, like we have records that, like, they, you know, they wouldn't, there's a stereotype about pirates that they, you know, rape and plunder, and, you know, but we have records of, you know, or again, reading between the lines, you can say that if someone's taking every opportunity to insult the Muslims, and then he doesn't say that, oh, after they took us captive in this attack, you know, he doesn't go on about how they were harassing the women and you know, you know, assaulting them, you know, raping them or anything. You kind of think like, well, wouldn't he have talked about that if they were? Like, he talks about in all these other places how they're bad to women. If they had actually done that, like, wouldn't he have jumped on that opportunity to say these people are savages?
So you have writers,
you know,
that are saying, you know, these people abuse women, and then when he talks about these, you know, renegades, it's that type of narrative is absent.
Yeah. So I mean, you kind of have to look for these omissions, because again, you're dealing with, there's a lot of polemic, there's a lot of like, and there's a lot of opportunism. You know, there'll be like, for example, there's like a pirate who, you know, probably the King of England should execute him, because he's a pirate, you know.
Yeah.
But instead, he writes this thing to tell the king all about how to counteract piracy and how to suppress piracy. And you know, so it's like, what's his motive? Like, he's trying not to get executed, you know. So all this stuff he's writing, there's a lot of compliments to the king. There's a lot of pot shots at the Muslims, and you know, talking about how the Corsairs are evil, and like, so if there's any compliments to the Corsairs in there, it's kind of like you really got to pick them out, and at the same time be like, you know, we know that, for example, you know, in the courts at that time, there wasn't a lot of crime. Like, we do have some court records from like Tunisia and Algiers, and you know, if I mean, you know, basically giving these people the benefit of the doubt to say that, like, yeah, maybe some of them were people who, like, they didn't just pray and fast and then, you know, make constant thick gooder, but like they were really trying to be good people, and to, you know, to spread the truth of this religion that they'd found, and that they believed in it, and that they wanted good for all the Europeans. Like, you know, that they probably felt bad that they had to leave their home countries and leave their families, and they wanted to reach them somehow. Like, what would you do if you had to leave your family and you were exiled, like on pain of prison from your home country? But you also had, you know, you were taken in by a government that was favorable, and you were allowed to engage. You know, it wasn't destructive war like we have today. It was much more fluid. You know, like, people would be taken captive and then ransomed and exchanged, and it wasn't. And you know, slavery, like, there was slavery involved, but it wasn't like the horrific chattel slavery of the American South. You know, it was a more humane, like, it was bondage. You know, like, it's not, you know, it's alhamdulillah that slavery is illegal everywhere today. But you know, it was more of a humane thing. You know, you weren't allowed to abuse your slaves, and some did, but some didn't. You know, so yeah, just get, you know, that's part of the process of this, is like trying to see, you know, who these people were, and to give them the benefit of the doubt that some of them were good people and really trying, and also that give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they did more than we have record of, you know.
Yeah.
Like, for example, this guy I'm looking at, he went to Iceland. You know, he spent, you know, 5 years. You know, he had a base in the British Isles, on an island there, for 5 years, which, you know,
wow.
I'm sure the British weren't thrilled about that.
Yeah.
But, you know, they probably couldn't get rid of him, you know, because he was powerful. And they had the same, you know, they had similar ships to the Europeans. They knew about the Americas. There's records of the Corsairs, you know, on the coasts of the Americas. So who knows what they were up to, you know? I mean, there are these kind of, on the edges of history, there's, on the edges of sort of widely accepted history, there's significant suggestions that there were, you know, meaningful Muslim contacts in among the First Nations of the Americas. So who knows, you know? I mean, I know you've experienced just as well as I have that, you know, in Islam, especially when you have Arabic and you have a language in common, like, it's pretty easy to get along across cultures, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, and there are people who are arguing that the Andalusian Muslims, you know, from Spain, that they were, you know, very actively, just as a matter of regular commerce, going to the Americas and coming back. And the same from the Empire of Mali in West Africa, for hundreds of years before Columbus. So, you know, who knows what they're up to? Like, this is a fiction project, but you know, I'm really trying to do my due diligence and to really base it in the realm of what's plausible, you know, of what's, you know, it's not crazy stuff where you're just making up sort of fantasy worlds. It's more like, you know, there's
realistic historical fiction kind of.
Yeah, Yeah, and again, within this framework of giving people the benefit of the doubt, to say that, like, okay, some people were depraved and criminals and greedy, but some people were struggling against that aspect of, all people have to, anyone who aspires to spiritual purification, you got to struggle against that. So some people were, and and some people, they really did try to do the right thing, and and maybe they were very skilled. Is it, like, does it make sense that people who were so capable as mariners, they were very, very capable sailors. For example, the Andalusians defeated the Vikings in naval battles, such that the Vikings no longer tried to harass Andalusia. They resoundingly, firmly, convincingly defeated the Vikings at sea. And we know the Vikings went to the Americas. That's accepted, right? That they had colonies across, Iceland and Greenland and Newfoundland, and who knows how far they went. So if the Andalusians were better sailors, more capable at sea than the Vikings, who knows, and again, in Spain, many records were destroyed, like after the fall of Granada, like, and especially in the years after that, there was a real program of basically compiling the official history and destroying the records of what came before. Like, that's documented that happened. So yeah, I'm personally, I'm pretty excited to see where it leads, because it is a process of really reading, studying the histories, and just kind of letting all of the what scholars have done within the limits of the evidence and the limits of sort of academic discourse, and to say, okay, so that's where academia has taken us. Where might our good opinions of those who came before us take us?
Yeah.
Without going without going into sort of crazy realms, like, let's just have a good opinion. Let's say that, okay, they were better. These people were probably better than me, and they knew what they were doing. They were very skilled.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited. The book, it's a serial novel. I'm wrapping up the first volume right now, so it's going to be short novellas, kind of like in episodes. I guess kind of like episodes of a TV show or something along those lines. So the first, inshallah, the first volume is going to be published in March, and actually taking pre-orders now. There's some bonuses available for people who pre-order. So, but yeah. What else to say about it?
Sounds awesome. I'll have to pre-order it myself.
Mashallah.
Inshallah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Right on.
That about wraps it up, huh? So.
Well, not really. I mean, I could talk about it for
years.
All day, but
so the first one's going to be about 100 pages. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not exactly settled. It's kind of the fiction process is pretty cool. I'm understanding how. I haven't really written fiction before, but
you have a degree in English. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I've read a lot of fiction, but yeah, and I'm deliberately going towards a more like. I think the substance is in the material. Like, I'm going more towards. It's not going to be hard to read.
Yeah.
I think
I'm
trying to. Yeah, page turner. But at the same time, like, I think the ideas involved are out there enough that, there's a lot to ponder. It doesn't have to be complicated language. So,
Yeah.
the kind of thing I want it to be really readable for like a 10 or 12-year-old, but also fun for an adult,
Okay, yeah.
Like a 10 or 12-year-old who's like good at reading,
Yeah.
reading at a relatively high level, inshallah.
I imagine this book would do all right in Spanish as well, inshallah, once you kind of finish through it.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I'd love it if it did well enough to translate.
Or even in Arabic too. Now you think about it,
Yeah.
I'm sure the Arab will.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see, inshallah. Yeah, I would love it if it does well enough to have people, in other languages, other countries interested. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Cool.
Thanks for this interview.
Yeah, good to talk, Greg.
Always good to talk. All right. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.